So yeah, I just wanted to talk a bit about what we're building with Zero. So I'm Bill Monkman. I'm the chief architect at Commit, and we're building a community of sort of great engineers and sort of working to support them and connect them with great startups. And I've been working at startups of varying sizes for over 20 years now. I specialize in backend, DevOps, distributed systems, scaling startups, and fun stuff like that. So, in my experience with scaling startups and with all of the work we've been doing with Commit with various startups, we've seen these problems over and over again where people are sort of constantly having to reinvent the wheel, and you're starting up your product. There's you want to drive toward getting something out the door and providing value and proving out your idea, but there's a bunch of other stuff that you have to do. And one of the big gaps that we've seen in sort of knowledge is around the DevOps side of things. And so often companies make trade-offs and sacrifices early on that end up sort of coming back to bite them later. They're focused on providing that customer value, but not on the foundation of what they're trying to build, which then leads to a situation where they need to go through a big sort of re-architecture and sort of big sort of challenges a couple years in when they're trying to grow and they want to be focused on growing, but now they need to slow down their velocity and do a bunch of sort of re-architecture work. So we built Zero because we saw all of this sort of stuff happening over and over again. We were helping a bunch of different startups. We were building up some of this sort of foundational code over time. And we wanted to sort of help to sort of accelerate that process and set some best practices and stuff like that. And so, we were already sort of writing code that introduced some best practices around some security, scalability, availability, 12-factor infrastructure as code. All these things that we know to be useful, especially as companies start to grow, that don't necessarily need to be sacrificed in the early days if they can be provided fairly easily. I think there's also a huge learning component here because we want to make sure that we are sort of not just giving people something to build upon, but also helping them to become experts at some of these technologies that we're using and providing enough resources for people to learn and get better at using some of these tools. And then there's also the sort of ownership aspect, which I think is really sort of interesting and compelling and something that's sort of missing in a lot of tools out there these days, because Zero itself is an open source tool, and everything that you create with it is all yours. If you're making something in AWS, all of this, we're creating all of the infrastructure as code, the actual code, and then all of the actual infrastructure is created within your AWS account. All of the code is checked into your repositories, and there's no sort of lock-in aside from the lock-in that AWS or whoever is going to try to do. And so sort of use the tool to start setting up all of your infrastructure and applications. There are a few different commands, so I'll sort of go over some of this stuff briefly. So there's the init, which is sort of an interview phase. It will go through and ask you a bunch of questions about how you want to set up your application and infrastructure. What your domain is going to be, if you want to enable user management, which will then enable the Kratos and Oathkeeper stuff, which database you want to use, basically all the stuff you want to sort of, what you want your baseline configuration to be. And then the output of this is going to be a project YAML file that is sort of the definition of the thing that you're trying to build. So all of the sort of modules that you chose, all the configuration options you chose and stuff like that. And then that file would then go into the next command, which is create. So create will actually take that project file and then render out a bunch of repositories for you. And so an infrastructure, backend, front end, static site. And these will then contain all of the code that you can check into GitHub and will become the foundation of your application and infrastructure. And then there's an apply command. And so the apply command will go through those repositories and actually do any sort of apply steps to make all that stuff a reality. And so at this point, it will actually create a bunch of real stuff. So it'll create infrastructure in your AWS account. It'll create your sort of do any API calls and anything that needs to be done to set up CI pipelines and all that kind of stuff. And so at the end of this command running, you would be able to go to that domain that you entered in the init step, and you would actually see a front end that would be in S3 served out of CloudFront, and it would be making calls to a backend running in EKS. And it would all be sort of deployed. And if you went in and sort of made a change, made a PR, merged it into your main branch, it would then kick off the deploy pipeline, deploy that, and enter your production environment. And so, the components here are infrastructure, backend, front end, a sort of static site, and CI, tying all of it together. The infrastructure, we're planning on doing GCP and Azure and other sort of cloud platforms. We've started with AWS. The sort of core of it is EKS, though we're sort of working on adding a serverless component for sort of companies that are earlier in their journey to sort of ease the sort of transition if EKS feels a little too complex or sort of costly. But we're using a bunch of great tools in EKS that really help the sort of experience and make things a lot easier. So things like Nginx Ingress Controller, external DNS for automatically provisioning DNS records, Cert Manager for automatically provisioning certificates through Let's Encrypt, Cluster Autoscaler, of course, Kratos and Oathkeeper for doing user management and providing an auth proxy, external secrets, and then a bunch of other AWS stuff. So, like setting up RDS, setting up VPC and security groups, and making sure that everything is properly locked down and configured and tied in together and stuff like that. And all of it represented with Terraform. And so it's all reproducible. It's all, you can see everything that's happening. It's easy to maintain and update. On the back end, right now we support Go and Node, and the backend service will be deployed into EKS, and we're rolling in a few application features as well to provide, again, some of this sort of baseline functionality, so people can build upon that. They can just sort of use it as an example, or if they wanted to write their application in a different language entirely, you can just sort of copy out the Docker file, Kubernetes manifests, and stuff like this into your whatever your project is in Python or whatever other language, and you would be able to still deploy that right into the infrastructure that we're setting up and take advantage of the pipelines and everything like that. The front end, again, similarly, we've got a bunch of the sort of front end of all of these application features built into that. It's in React is the only version right now, and it's deployed into S3 and served out of CloudFront, so you can take advantage of using a CDN and having sort of a global scale distribution of your application. And then we also have a marketing site that's using Gatsby for static site generation. So this basically with the back end, the front end, and the static site, you sort of have your full, sort of everything that you need. So for commit, for example, commit.dev would hit the landing page. App.commit.dev would be the application that would hit the front end, and then API.commit.dev would be then the API that the front end is communicating with. And then the CI is what sort of, again, ties it all together. So right now we support Circle CI and GitHub Actions, and we set up all the pipelines with a pretty standard flow of, once your code gets into your main branch, we kick off the pipeline, run tests, deploy to staging, test then staging, and then a manual sort of approval step to deploy to production. And so there's definitely a big focus on user experience, developer experience, providing automated deployments and sort of tooling to help improve the developer experience and make it easy to understand and easy to manage and easy to maintain and stuff like that. And with all of the sort of code and infrastructure being yours, that definitely sort of provides a lot of flexibility. You can sort of take what's there and modify it as much as you want, or just use part of it. It's also sort of a reference architecture, so you can take the Terraform that we're sort of spitting out, and even sort of mix and match that into other projects if there's something that's interesting. And we have built out a lot of learning resources, and beyond that, there's also the sort of the community where we've got a Slack channel that people can join. So to the Ory integration. So when we were thinking about common features that applications are having to build, definitely user management and auth is way up there as something that is everyone's done it a million times. No one should have to do it again. And so we didn't want people to be writing user management code. We wanted a unified sort of authentication layer so that backends didn't have to be doing the same thing over and over again, especially if you are sort of thinking about a microservice architecture. You don't want all of your backends to be duplicating a bunch of auth code. And we wanted something that we can represent as much as possible in Terraform. And so it would be easy for us to integrate into our stack and set up and sort of glue together. So I had been exposed to Oathkeeper before and sort of used it a bit previously, and have liked a bunch of stuff that Ory has been doing, and how sort of lightweight and sort of slick a lot of the implementations are. And so for this, we decided to use the Kubernetes operator and the Helm Terraform provider, which lets us leverage the good work that's gone into the Ory Helm charts. We're allowing for some sort of config merging, which I'll talk about, to allow a lot of flexibility of the configuration of Kratos and Oathkeeper. And then we really wanted to allow the application to be in control of the configuration, which is our sort of main motivator for using the operator, because we wanted to, similarly to how in our applications we were letting the application define some of the Kubernetes setup for how the deployment's set up and the ingress and stuff like that. We want it to also be able to specify some of the auth rules that are going to apply to it, so that the developers can have some control over that, and it's not just like a separate sort of ops task that needs to be run through Terraform or however else. So the way we've implemented this, we've got a user auth module in Terraform registry, which allows us to configure both Kratos and Oathkeeper. And so you can see here we've got just a bunch of information here that you can sort of go in and tweak about how your project is set up, the domains, and sort of at the bottom there you can see the sort of override maps. So I'll talk about that in a sec. So we're using inside this module, we're also using this Cloud Posse config module, which is pretty handy. And basically we have a few levels of overrides that are happening here. So we have this Kratos values file, which is and Oathkeeper values file, which are the sort of Helm values that get passed in, that are sort of the defaults. There's the local overrides, which is the more dynamic stuff that we're setting automatically, like the stuff that the user's already specified, domain names and stuff like that. So that sort of gets overlaid on top of the default values. And then there's also the sort of values that get passed in through that map. And so by doing this, we can sort of allow the user to take advantage of the sort of defaults, but then also pass in any value in the Kratos or Oathkeeper config if they want to. There are obviously a lot of different configuration options in a lot of these tools, and so this sort of gives people access to actually go in and tweak stuff and configure it exactly how they need to. And we're using the Helm Terraform provider, and so this again lets us sort of leverage what people have worked on for the Ory Helm charts. And so we're basically just, again, taking all of those config values that we merged above, and here just passing them right into that Helm chart. And then this is a sort of illustration of how the application controls its configuration. And so this would be included in the application config, like in the Kubernetes config. And so this is using one of the custom resources that the operator exposes. And so the Oathkeeper operator, or the Maester, it sort of allows you to create these rules in Kubernetes, and then the operator will consume the rules and configure itself based on sort of how it sees them being changed over time. And so when your application is deployed, the sort of CI pipeline will take all of the Kubernetes code, get it ready, and then apply it to the cluster. And in this case, it will create rules that will tell Oathkeeper how to configure some of the rules that are going to be applied. So in this case, for example, setting up specific sort of paths and URLs, methods, and then the sort of handlers that are going to be applied. And so this lets, especially if you have multiple services running, and each one needs to have some amount of control over its own paths and its own subdomains and how it's going to do auth, then this makes it really easy for the developers of each specific app to control how all that stuff is going to happen. This is a sort of cheesy illustration of how stuff flows within what we're setting up. Obviously, leaving out some of the finer details, but basically, user makes a request. It'll go through Elastic Load Balancer that's configured by the Nginx ingress controller, and then Nginx will pass the request on to Oathkeeper, which then again is using the sidecar to automatically configure itself based on the rules. And then Oathkeeper will send requests on to Kratos or to the backend service based on if some of those rules were fulfilled. And from the application point of view, this is where we wanted to make it really, really easy. In the configuration of Oathkeeper, we can basically say that we're going to be getting a JWT. It's going to have this information in it, and we've sort of configured it to take specific pieces out and sort of translate it into headers. And so this is all sort of like functionality that's enabled by Oathkeeper, and you can just sort of configure how that mapping works. But with this, we basically make it so that the applications themselves, they're running inside EKS, don't need to worry about validating a JWT or the structure of the data inside a JWT or anything like that. It's sort of abstracted by Oathkeeper. And then the only thing the application needs to care about is, am I receiving these headers? And so in this case, you can see here that basically we could just say, are these headers present? User ID and email. If they're not, then it's a 401. I need that information to be passed into me from Oathkeeper. And if it was provided, then I trust it. And so add some context into the request so that my application can tell which user is logged in, what their email address is, and stuff like that. And this is I think really, really powerful to sort of abstract that away, so your application doesn't really need to care about it. And you can of course configure it so you can't sort of spoof it and pass in these headers yourself. You can just sort of strip them out ahead of time, so that you can trust the fact that if they were passed into your application, then you can use them. They're valid data, and the user has been authorized or authenticated and has a session. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a bit of a quick overview, mostly sort of touching on the Oathkeeper side of things. But the sort of the Kratos side of things, I think is definitely really valuable for us as well, just to sort of cut out that step of having to deal with all of the sort of user management stuff. And we've also sort of added some examples of how to do some integrations with, say, just the Oathkeeper layer, but then another piece handling user management like Auth0 or Cognito and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, even in that case, just having Oathkeeper there and sort of providing that abstraction piece is really valuable and awesome sort of functionality. And so some links here. I think probably these slides will be shared, but you can check out our site at getzero.dev. We've got some documentation up there. Our Slack channel where you can come to sort of chat if you have some questions or need help getting started, and a couple case studies of how people have used Zero and done some interesting things with it. So yeah, that's about it for me.